you mentioned drills there, and I wanted to ask you about biomechanics because you opened kind of talking about workload, which seems like a low-hanging fruit. You know, if you're doing a little bit more than you can recover from, let's manage that. That's easy. That can be done. You don't even need to see me for that. We can have a phone call, you know, that type of thing. But then you mentioned a lot of your athletes are local, which is nice, and you can actually watch them move. How much does running biomechanics matter? Are there certain guidelines, like specific rules of thumb, that you would say across the board is probably a good idea, like step rate or something like that, or is it very individual? And some running technique that you see in one athlete, you may let fly, and on another athlete, you might intervene on.
A lot of times it does depend. There are like guidelines that I look at. So I'm gonna look at their step rate. I'm gonna look at their strike pattern. I'm gonna look at the shoes that they're wearing. But it's not a one size fits all. I'm not trying to get every single person to be a forefoot striker or a midfoot striker or a heel striker. Like, all of those striking patterns are viable ones until they're not. You know, and that's something that I've learned from my coach and mentor, Chris Johnson. That's something that he always says. But, you know, people should be able to accommodate those to different terrain. So going uphill versus downhill versus if they're running on a trail, those striking patterns are going to vary. So the big things that I'm looking for are someone that's overstriding, so taking really big strides with their knee like hyperextended, and then they're aggressively striking on their heel, or overstriking, so really landing hard. Those are the two things that I'm paying attention to. If there's, you know, and that at that point, I'll probably take a peek at their cadence or their step rate and see where they're falling in the range. Typically, if they're falling below 160, that's where I'm gonna try and make some changes. No longer is it the average of 180, which that used to be the arbitrary, like everyone has to be at 180. What now they're looking at is that it's more a 5 to 10% increase above that person's average at their self-selected running speed.
And that's steps per minute, right? For those who.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes. But other things that I look at, you know, arm swing. Are they, you know, aggressively crossing over their body? Are they, you know, wasting energy there? I want to see kind of just more of a glide at their sides. What else? I would say, yeah, the overstriding and the overstriking are the two big ones that I'm looking at. You know, I'll pay attention to their hip drop, contralateral hip drop, opposite of their striking leg or their stance leg. Trying to think what else. It's hard to, on treadmills, their like vertical oscillation. That's something that people will often talk about, but that's going to increase on the treadmill. So it's hard to be like, oh, well, you have to stop that. But when I do the evaluations, I record everything just on my iPad, and then I show them everything. But I try to not point out every little detail, because then the next run that they go on, they're like running like a robot because they're over analyzing everything. So not that I try and downplay it, but I only try and point out the things that I think are really, you know, contributing to something or could be a problem down the line. If it's not going to set them up for potential problems, I might not bring it up. It also depends on what the, you know, how much this person is wanting to know. If they're like they want to geek out and they want to know everything, I'm like, all right, let's dig into this. But if I see that someone's a little bit more timid, sometimes less is more.
Yeah, well, I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, you're thinking about your outcomes, and if you were to load them up with every little thing or everything that crossed through your mind, that probably would make it more likely that we get some paralysis by analysis, or at least get an outcome that you didn't intend to get. And I've worked with just a few runners, but the example that I run into more often are, strength athletes, people who are in the gym who have been told at some point that, excuse me, some particular biomechanical pattern is wrong. So like squatting with their knees past their toes, or if their knees get into a little bit of valgus, like that's terrible. It's the knee bowler, right, Quinn? It'll get you. So with those people, one thing that I try to do, like as we start the assessment, maybe I'm just looking at how they're standing or sitting, and then we get into getting them to do whatever things seem relevant to them. Like you said, I'm probably making note of a few different things and also weighing out what, I guess it's a two-part system, what things I think are worth addressing at some point, and then also what things I think are worth telling them about at that moment in time. And also, like you said, it's not about being dishonest or not sharing all information that might be relevant, but it's also just sort of playing the odds, what's necessary right now, and making mental notes. I'll circle back around to this later, or if they seem super keen, then sharing more. Do you find that you have to do a lot of like re-education with people that you work with, whether it's in more of a rehab context or more of the coaching, in terms of people having been told that this particular strike pattern is wrong, or you need to be at this step rate, or any of these other sort of arbitrary sort of tenets? Does that happen a lot?
Yes.
Sweet.
Almost every runner has had some preconceived notion that one way is the best way, whether it might not be about all of those things, but strike pattern or step rate, or that they shouldn't do strength training, or that they need to foam roll every day, or so there's a lot of re-education. So I find that I have the best communications and education with people that are coming in as my clients or coaching, not just like one-off run evals. Just because I can have those conversations time and time again. Like recently I've worked with a girl who was put in orthotics like a year ago. And like we like each session I was like, yeah, you might not need these someday. Like maybe we just start trying to wean off of them. And I actually recorded her running with them and without them. And her running looked no different. And I showed her that, and I was like, look at this. There's no difference. And she's like, oh my God, that's crazy. And then little by little each week, she's like, yeah, I don't think I did any runs this week with my orthotics. And I felt fine. And I was like, yes, this is amazing. So it definitely pays off to continue to educate them time and time again. And, obviously not try and sound like a broken record, but just exposing them to different thought processes, and that, there isn't just one way, and it's not just one shoe that's going to be the best shoe for everyone. And, runners are unique. They all have different bodies and different ways of going about things that it really can work. You just have to figure out if it works best for that person.
Do you ever get backfire effect from the people who want the answer, like what the shoe is or what the right way to run is, and you're like, there isn't one, and they're like, that's not what I wanted? Does that happen much?
A little bit, but I try and just joke with them. I'm like, honestly, I was like, go to the shoe store, like if it's for shoes, go to the shoe store and try on every pair of shoes. Because I was like, that's their job. I was like, you have to try on every pair of shoes and you find which one's comfortable. They're like, really? I'm like, yeah. I'm like, don't walk out of the store unless you're comfortable. They're like, well, what about? I'm like, doesn't matter. They're like, oh, okay. So I try and have a little humor with them, and my patients know them. And coaching clients know I'm pretty sarcastic, so that I feel like that helps cut cut it down a little bit.
Love it.
The orthotics is an interesting piece because sometimes you have to be delicate with how you navigate that. A lot of times they have orthotics because another healthcare professional recommended it. So I like how you framed that. Hey, you know, why don't we just see what it feels like and what it looks like? Can't hurt. Big shrug. Just curious.
That's basically what I did.
Yeah.
Nice.